While my husband toasts to 5 amazing years together at our anniversary dinner, I'm discreetly confirming details with the private investigator I hired 3 months ago. As Mark kisses my cheek and promises me the world, my phone vibrates, with photos of him and his very pregnant girlfriend touring a nursery yesterday. He has no idea that his financially dependent wife has been quietly transferring his hidden assets back into our joint accounts, the ones he thinks I'm too naive to monitor. The diamond tennis bracelet he just presented me weighs heavy on my wrist, almost as heavy as the secret I'm carrying. In exactly 47 minutes, Jessica Palmer will walk through those restaurant doors with her 8-month pregnant belly and shatter the perfect image he's worked so hard to maintain. But unlike the devastated wife he expects me to be, I've spent months preparing for this moment. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this journey of discovery and justice, make sure to subscribe for another dramatic story tomorrow. My hand remains steady as I sip my champagne, a practiced smile playing at my lips. Through the window of the Harbor View restaurant, I can see the Boston skyline reflecting on the water, the same city where Mark first promised to love me forever. The irony isn't lost on me as he orders another bottle of Dom Perignon, oblivious to what's coming. "Emily, are you enjoying yourself?" Mark asks, his voice full of rehearsed affection. His Rolex glints under the chandelier light, the watch I helped him select for his promotion last year. "Everything is perfect," I reply, noting the time, 8:13 p.m. Jessica should be arriving around 9. My phone buzzes discreetly with a text from Rachel, my lawyer. "Everything's prepared. Are you absolutely certain about tonight?" I glance at Mark, now charming our waiter with stories about our perfect marriage, while his hand rests possessively on mine. I've documented every lie for months, the late meetings that corresponded perfectly with hotel charges, the business trips that aligned exactly with Jessica's Instagram posts about romantic getaways, all while he drained our savings to set up his new life. What he doesn't know is that I've known for months. But unlike what he'd expect, I didn't confront him with tears and accusations. I didn't throw his designer suits onto our Beacon Hill townhouse lawn or key his precious BMW. Instead, I did what he never expected. I followed the money. "Happy anniversary, beautiful," Mark says, raising his glass. I notice a slight nervousness in his movements. He keeps checking his phone under the table, probably telling Jessica not to call tonight of all nights. "To us," I respond, clinking my glass against his. And to surprises, he has no idea how prophetic those words are. 6 months ago, I discovered the first clue, an unfamiliar charge, at a jewelry store on our credit card statement. The same statement Mark insisted I didn't need to trouble my pretty little head about, because he handled the finances. The emerald necklace never appeared around my neck, but 3 weeks later, it was prominently featured in Jessica's "Lucky Me" Instagram post. That night, while Mark slept soundly beside me, I began my investigation. A quick search revealed Jessica Palmer, 29, yoga instructor turned lifestyle influencer, whose sudden upgrade to designer clothes and luxury vacations coincided perfectly with my husband's increasing work commitments. "You know," Mark muses, cutting into his steak, "we should think about that trip to Santorini we've been putting off." I smile, knowing he has no intention of taking that trip with me. I've already seen the Greece reservations he's made for next month, first-class tickets for 2, but not in my name. "That sounds wonderful," I reply, watching him relax at my apparent obliviousness. "Though we might need to check our savings first." A flicker of discomfort crosses his face. He thinks I don't know about the second bank account he opened or how he's been siphoning money from our joint savings. He doesn't realize I've already spoken with our bank manager, who happens to be my college roommate's husband. "Don't worry about money, Em," he says dismissively. "I've got everything under control." Oh, Mark, if only you knew. While he's been planning his exit strategy, I've been 10 steps ahead. The day after discovering Jessica's existence, I contacted Rachel Torres, the best divorce attorney in Boston and my friend since law school. Together, we began documenting everything. Every lie, every missing dollar, every asset he thought he'd hidden. "Remember our first date here?" Mark asks, his hand covering mine in a display of affection that now feels hollow. "I remember everything," I say truthfully, "including how you swore you'd never be like your father, the man who abandoned your mother for his secretary." The irony is almost poetic. My phone discreetly vibrates again, a message from David Chen, my financial advisor. "All transfers complete. He won't be able to access the offshore account once we file tomorrow." I excuse myself to the restroom, checking my appearance in the mirror. My Valentino dress, a guilt gift from Mark after a weekend he claimed was a conference in New York, hugs my figure perfectly. My makeup is flawless, my expression composed. The woman staring back at me isn't a victim. She's a strategist. In the privacy of the stall, I confirm the final arrangements with Rachel. Jessica just checked in with the hostess. ETA 10 minutes. Security and the photographer are in position. Tonight was Mark's idea. A lavish anniversary dinner where he could play the devoted husband before asking for a divorce next week. I found the drafted papers in his home office, already filled out, claiming irreconcilable differences. He planned to paint me as financially incapable of supporting myself, conveniently forgetting that before I agreed to manage our home, I worked as a financial analyst at the same firm where he's now partner. What he doesn't know is that his father, disappointed by watching history repeat itself, secretly signed the family vacation property over to me last month. "He's too much like me at my worst," Robert had said, his voice heavy with regret. "Don't let him leave you with nothing." I return to the table just as Mark is ordering dessert, my favorite chocolate souffle that takes exactly 20 minutes to prepare. Perfect timing. "You look beautiful tonight," he says, and for a moment, I see a flicker of the man I married. Then his phone buzzes, and even though he doesn't check it, I catch his momentary panic. Jessica isn't following the script. "Thank you," I reply. "It's important to look our best on special occasions, don't you think?" He nods, relieved that I suspect nothing. Under the table, I check the time. 8:52 p.m. Any minute now. Preparing and sharing this story took considerable effort. If you're enjoying this journey of discovery, please subscribe to our channel. It truly means everything to us. Now, back to our story. The restaurant has filled with the Friday night crowd. The hostess catches my eye with a subtle nod, our prearranged signal. Jessica has arrived. "You know," Mark says, reaching for my hand, "these 5 years have been—" "Mark, is that you?" The voice cuts through the ambient restaurant noise like a knife. Mark freezes, his face draining of color as he turns to see Jessica standing beside our table, her hand resting protectively over her very prominent baby bump. "Jessica," he chokes out. Why are you—" "Hello, darling," she says, but she's looking at me, not him. "I'm Jessica. I believe we haven't been properly introduced." The restaurant has gone silent around us. Several diners have their phones out, recording. The photographer Rachel arranged, disguised as a fellow, diner is capturing every moment. Mark stands abruptly. "Jessica, this isn't— Emily, I can explain—" "Explain what exactly?" I ask calmly, rising to my feet. "How you've been seeing Jessica for the past year. How you've spent over $200,000 of our money setting up your new life? Or perhaps you'd like to explain these." I open my clutch, removing printed screenshots of hotel reservations, jewelry receipts, and a copy of the deed to the Back Bay apartment he purchased last month, all meticulously dated and organized. "How did you—" he stammers, looking frantically between Jessica and me. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" I ask softly. "Or did you just assume I was too stupid to understand?" Jessica's eyes widen as she looks at the documents. "You said you were divorced," she whispers to Mark. "You said this was your investment property." "Mark told me he was working late tonight," I inform her. "Emergency client meeting. I assume he told you something similar?" Jessica's face crumples. "He said he was having dinner with his mother to break the news about the baby." Margaret Wilson, who has known about my investigation for weeks and has been waiting for my signal, chooses this perfect moment to enter the restaurant. Her eyes lock on the tableau, her son standing between his wife and his pregnant girlfriend. "The only news I've received," Margaret announces, her voice carrying through the now silent restaurant, "is that my son is exactly like his father." Mark's face contorts with panic. "Mom, what are you— Emily, let me explain this privately." "There's nothing to explain," I say, my voice steady. "Jessica, I'm sorry you've been lied to. I've only known about you for 3 months, but I suspect there's a lot we both don't know." 3 months? Mark looks stricken. "You've known for 3 months?" "I've known something was wrong much longer," I admit, "but I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before acting." "Acting?" His voice rises an octave. "What have you done?"
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I smile, opening my email app to show him the confirmation. All accounts frozen pending divorce proceedings. All recently transferred assets returned to joint ownership. All evidence of financial impropriety documented for court. "Everything you tried to hide," I explain calmly. "Every account you thought I couldn't access. Every property you purchased thinking I wouldn't find out. It's all been secured. The prenup you insisted upon? It has a fidelity clause, which means instead of leaving me with nothing, you'll be the one starting over." The souffle arrives at our table, the waiter placing it carefully before backing away from the unfolding drama. "You can't do this," Mark hisses, grabbing my arm. "You're nothing without me." Security, arranged by Rachel, materializes beside us. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" "No problem," I reply, gently removing Mark's hand. "My husband was just leaving. He has a lot to discuss with Jessica, and I have a chocolate souffle to enjoy." As security escorts a protesting Mark toward the exit, Jessica remains, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know," she whispers. "He told me you were separating, that you were after his money." I gesture to the chair opposite mine. "Would you like to sit? I imagine we have a lot to talk about." She hesitates, then nods, lowering herself carefully into the seat Mark vacated. "How far along are you?" I ask, pushing the untouched souffle between us. 34 weeks, she replies, her hand protectively cradling her belly. A boy. I feel a strange calm as I process this information. He always wanted a son. For the next hour, Jessica and I compare notes, filling in the gaps of Mark's elaborate double life. The restaurant manager, forewarned about the potential disruption, keeps our table private, bringing Jessica water and declining to present the check. "What will you do now?" Jessica finally asks. I consider this question, looking out at the Boston skyline that once represented my settled life. I'll start over, but this time on my terms, not his. My phone buzzes with a text from Rachel. Just got word. He tried to access the Cayman account. Denied. Attempted to check into the Windsor Grand. Card declined. Currently having a meltdown in the hotel lobby. For the first time in months, I feel myself truly smile. Let him rage, I murmur, then look up at Jessica. The question is, what will you do? She looks down at her hands, twisting the promise ring Mark gave her. I don't know. I thought we were building a life together. He's very good at creating illusions, I acknowledge, but now you get to decide what's real. As I leave the harbor view that night, alone but unburdened, I feel lighter than I have in years. Tomorrow will bring divorce filings, family fallout, And no doubt, Mark's desperate attempts to salvage his reputation and finances. But tonight, I've reclaimed my narrative from the man who thought I'd be too devastated to function when his lies were exposed. He expected tears, hysteria, and weakness. Instead, he found himself outmaneuvered by the woman he severely underestimated. Some lessons come at a tremendous cost. Mark's will be learning exactly what happens when you mistake silence for ignorance and patience for weakness. The morning after the restaurant revelation, I dress with careful precision, a cream St. John knit suit that Mark always said made me look professionally pretty. The mirror reflects exactly what I need the world to see today. A woman composed, despite betrayal. I smooth my hair into a sleek chignon, fasten pearl earrings that belonged to my grandmother, and apply just enough makeup to ensure no one will describe me as looking tired or obviously devastated. Through the bedroom window, Boston's skyline emerges from morning fog. The financial district where Mark and I both once worked, now bathed in golden light. There's something poetic about facing this day with the sun at my back. My phone has been buzzing constantly since 5 a.m. I've ignored most notifications, only responding to Rachel's text confirming our 9 a.m. meeting at Hamilton & Associates. Mark has called 17 times and left 8 voicemails, each more desperate than the last. I finally listened to the most recent. "Emily, please." His voice sounds hoarse, probably from a night of arguing with Jessica. "We need to talk before you do anything rash. This isn't what you think. I can explain everything if you'll just answer my calls." I delete it without responding. There's nothing rash about plans carefully laid over 3 months. The townhouse feels cavernous this morning. I walk through rooms Mark and I designed together, seeing now how they were always showcases for his success rather than spaces for our happiness. The kitchen with its Sub-Zero refrigerator and Le Cornu range where I prepared countless dinner parties for his clients. The living room featured last year in Boston Home Magazine, styled to project old money stability that Mark's nouveau riche background craved. I make myself espresso in the machine he insisted we needed, though I've always preferred simple drip, coffee. As the machine hums, I check my secure email, finding updates from David Chen that confirm all financial fail-safes have been activated. Mark attempted access to 4 separate accounts overnight, each attempt documented and denied. The doorbell rings precisely at 7:30 a.m. Margaret Wilson, my mother-in-law, elegant even in obvious distress. When I open the door, she embraces me without hesitation. "I didn't sleep," she confesses, following me to the kitchen. "Robert and I argued half the night about whether we raised a monster." I pour her espresso, adding the single sugar cube she prefers. "Mark isn't a monster. Margaret, just a man who thought he deserved everything without consequences." She accepts the cup with trembling hands. "He gets that from his father. Though Robert at least had the decency to wait until Olivia was in college before his midlife crisis." She looks around the kitchen, noticing details with new eyes. "He called us at midnight, wanted to stay at the house. Robert refused." "Where did he go?" I ask, more curious than concerned. "According to Olivia, who still speaks to him unlike the rest of us, he spent the night in his office after the Windsor Grand declined his credit card." Margaret sips her espresso, a small satisfaction crossing her face. "Apparently, Jessica also refused to let him stay with her after they left the restaurant. Smart girl, despite her poor judgment in men." I feel an unexpected wave of sympathy for Jessica, who lost her illusions even more abruptly than I lost mine. She didn't know about me either, at least not the truth. "Men like Mark and Robert," Margaret says with the weariness of experience, "create separate realities and expect everyone to live in the ones they've been assigned." The doorbell rings again. This time it's Rachel, dressed in a charcoal suit that means business, carrying a leather portfolio that contains the dissolution of my marriage in meticulously prepared legal documents. "Good morning," she says, her tone professional even though she's been my friend for 15 years. "Are you ready for today?" "She was born ready," Margaret answers before I can, a fierce pride in her voice. "Coffee, Rachel? Or are we saving caffeine for after the initial filing?" Rachel checks her watch. "We have time. The courier just delivered copies of everything to Mark's office and Jessica's apartment. Based on timing, he should be receiving his now." As if summoned by her words, my phone buzzes with Mark's name. When I decline the call, a text immediately follows. "You cannot do this. I built everything we have." "Interesting perspective," Rachel notes, reading the message over my shoulder. "Considering it was your inheritance that provided the down payment on this house, and your work at Atlantic Partners that introduced him to the clients who made his career." I silence my phone, placing it face down on the counter. He rewrites history to suit his narrative. Always has. We finish our coffee while Rachel reviews today's strategy. At 8:15, we prepare to leave for her office where a notary awaits. As I gather my purse and the accordion folder containing original documents, headlights flash across the front windows. A car pulling urgently into our driveway. "Right on schedule," Rachel murmurs, checking her watch. "Want to bet he's wearing yesterday's clothes?" Through the beveled glass panels flanking our front door, I watch Mark emerge from his BMW, indeed rumpled in his anniversary dinner suit, his face haggard from what was clearly a sleepless night. He's clutching papers, the divorce filing he's just received. "Emily," he shouts, pounding on the door. "Open the door. You've been hacked or something. These papers are insane." Margaret moves to stand beside me, her presence protective despite her 5'3" frame. Should I answer it? I consider the man on my doorstep, the husband who planned to leave me with nothing, who created a parallel life while systematically undermining my confidence, who expected me to crumble when confronted with his betrayal. No, I decide. We'll use the back door. He'll only follow us to the office, which is exactly where we want him. Rachel nods approvingly. The court stenographer will be present for our meeting. Everything he says becomes part of the record. We exit through the garden terrace, taking Margaret's car, which is parked on the side street. As we pull away, I glimpse Mark in my side mirror, still pounding on our front door, oblivious to the fact that I'm no longer following his script. Hamilton and Associates occupies 3 floors of a gleaming tower overlooking Boston Harbor. The reception area hums with purposeful energy as assistants coordinate calls and couriers deliver time-sensitive documents. Mark arrives 10 minutes after we've settled into Rachel's corner office, having obviously followed us from the house. "You can't hide from me in my own home," he announces, bursting through the door that Rachel deliberately left open. His tie is askew, his normally immaculate hair disheveled from repeatedly running his hands through it. "Mr. Wilson," Rachel says coolly, "thank you for joining us promptly. I see you've received our filing." "This is ridiculous," he sputters, waving the papers. "Half our assets? My partnership shares? The house? Have you lost your mind, Emily?" I notice he doesn't mention the baby or Jessica or the apartment he purchased for their new life together. "Please have a seat, Mr. Wilson," Rachel continues, gesturing to the empty chair positioned directly across from me. "As you can see, we have a stenographer present. Everything said in this meeting will be entered into the official record." Mark finally notices the professional-looking woman seated quietly in the corner, her fingers poised over a stenotype machine. His attorney training kicks in, and he visibly recalibrates, straightening his tie and lowering his voice. "There's been a misunderstanding," he says, attempting dignity despite his rumpled appearance. "I'd like to speak with my wife privately." "Ex-wife," I correct him quietly. "Or soon-to-be. And anything you wish to say can be said here." His face hardens. "You think you've been clever, Emily? Spying on me? Freezing accounts? Playing the victim? Is acknowledging your pregnant girlfriend's existence playing the victim?" Margaret interjects, her voice sharp. "Is expecting fidelity in marriage some unreasonable demand?" Mark blanches. seemingly noticing his mother's presence for the first time. "Mom? What are you doing here?" "Supporting the family member who hasn't disgraced our name," she replies crisply. "Your father wanted to come too, but his blood pressure wouldn't allow it." Mark's composure cracks further. He turns back to me, desperation bleeding through his practiced attorney demeanor. "Emily, be reasonable. Yes, I made a mistake with Jessica, but this..." He gestures at the divorce papers. "This is overkill. We can work through this." "Work through this?" I repeat, my voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. "The way we worked through you draining our joint savings? Or perhaps the way we worked through you purchasing property for your new family? Or maybe you mean work through the prenuptial agreement you're now violating." I slide an enlarged copy of said agreement across the table, Section 7. 3 highlighted in yellow. In the event of infidelity by either party, proven by preponderance of evidence, the faithful spouse shall be entitled to 75% of all marital assets, acquired during the marriage regardless of contribution. "You insisted on this clause," I remind him. "Said it would protect both of us from making emotional mistakes. I believe those were your exact words." Mark stares at the document, recognition dawning in his eyes. He'd assumed I'd never read. The dense legal text had counted on my trust in him as both husband and attorney. What he hadn't counted on was my methodical nature and perfect recall for details, especially those involving our financial security. "That's not enforceable," he attempts, lawyer mode fully engaged now. "No court would..." "3 courts already have," Rachel interjects smoothly. "Ramsey v. Ramsey, 2018, Johansson v. Johansson, 2020, and most recently, Phillips v. Phillips last year, which set precedent in this very jurisdiction." She slides forward another document, printouts of all 3 cases, each annotated in her precise handwriting. "My firm handled the Phillips case personally. Judge Morrison presided. The same Judge Morrison who, coincidentally, has been assigned to your case." Mark's face drains of color. Judge Morrison's reputation for upholding prenuptial fidelity clauses is well known throughout Boston legal circles. It was one of many factors Rachel and I considered when timing our filing. "You've clearly been planning this for some time," he says, anger replacing shock, while pretending everything was normal, playing the devoted wife. The irony of his accusation isn't lost on anyone in the room. Even the stenographer's fingers pause momentarily. "Yes," I acknowledge simply. "I have." "Why not just confront me?" he demands. "Why the elaborate scheme? The public humiliation?" I study him for a moment, this man I thought I knew intimately. "Would you have preferred I throw your clothes on the lawn? Scream and cry? Perhaps beg you to choose me over her? At least, that would have been honest," he snaps. "Like you were honest?" Margaret interjects. "Planning to leave your wife while draining your accounts? Hiding a pregnant girlfriend? Purchasing property in secret?" "That's different," Mark insists. "I was trying to minimize the pain, make a clean break." "For yourself," I clarify, "while maximizing the pain for me." He leans forward, lowering, his voice as if sharing a confidence. "Emily, be realistic. You've been out of the workforce for years. You couldn't maintain our lifestyle without me. I was going to be generous in the settlement." I slide forward another document, my employment contract with Blackstone Wealth Management, effective 2 weeks from today. Senior financial advisor. Starting salary comparable to what you make at your firm, plus performance bonuses. His eyes widen as he scans the document. "How? When did you interview?" 2 months ago. I never stopped maintaining my certifications or industry contacts. Did you really think I spent all those charity luncheons discussing fashion? Mark sits back, reassessing me with new eyes. The wife he thought he knew, decorative, dependent, defined by her relationship to him, is evaporating before him. revealing a woman who has always been more strategic than he realized. "What about Jessica?" he finally asks. "The baby?" "What about them?" I counter. "You created that situation. You'll need to resolve it." "Without my assets? Without my home? You're leaving me with nothing." Rachel clears her throat. "Mr. Wilson, perhaps you should review page 17 of our filing. Mrs. Wilson has actually been quite generous, leaving you your personal investment portfolio and your partnership shares, minus those purchased with joint funds. You'll hardly be destitute. Though you might need to downsize from the Back Bay apartment you purchased for Jessica," Margaret adds. "Perhaps something more modest in Charleston." Mark's phone buzzes. He checks it, wincing at whatever message he's received. "Jessica's lawyer," he mutters. "Apparently she's filing for support." "How inconvenient for you," I observe, "having your carefully separated worlds collide." He looks up, desperation evident in the fine lines that weren't there yesterday. "I made mistakes, Emily. Terrible ones. But 17 years together has to count for something." "It counted for everything," I correct him gently. "That's why I spent 3 months ensuring you'd face consequences rather than just walking away." Rachel interrupts, ever the professional. "We should discuss next steps. Mrs. Wilson has authorized me to negotiate certain points, provided the core agreement remains intact." "I need my own lawyer," Mark says, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "By all means," Rachel agrees. "Though you should know we've already spoken with Gerald at your firm. He's recused himself due to conflict of interest, as have most of your colleagues. Something about respecting their long-standing relationships with Atlantic partners, where Mrs. Wilson will be handling significant portfolios. The realization that I've not only secured my financial future, but potentially damaged his professional one, hits Mark visibly. His shoulders slump as the carefully constructed world he's built begins crumbling around him. "What do you want?" he asks, defeat evident in his voice. "Exactly what's in those papers," I reply calmly. "No more, no less." As the meeting concludes, Mark looks years older than when it began. The stenographer gathers her equipment while Rachel schedules our next appearance before Judge Morrison. Margaret steps into the hallway to update Robert on what's transpired. Left momentarily alone with my soon-to-be ex-husband, I feel a curious emptiness where rage or satisfaction should be. "You could have just asked for a divorce," I tell him quietly. "I would have given you one." "Would you have let me keep my dignity?" he asks bitterly. I consider this question seriously. "Probably not," I admit. "But then, you weren't planning to leave me mine." As he walks toward the door, shoulders bent under the weight of consequences, Mark pauses. "Did you ever really love me? Or was I just some long-term investment strategy?" The cruelty of his question catches me off guard. For all his faults, I never questioned whether Mark had loved me once. That he could doubt the authenticity of my feelings reveals how completely he's rewritten our history to justify his betrayal. "I loved you enough to build a life around you," I answer truthfully. "Enough to reshape myself to fit your expectations. Enough to ignore the signs that you'd stopped loving me." I meet his gaze directly. "The question isn't whether I loved you, Mark. It's whether you ever really saw me at all." He has no answer for that. With a final nod that acknowledges the divide now unbridgeable between us, he walks out of Rachel's office and out of my life. Not on his terms as he'd planned, but on mine. The forensic accountants finished their preliminary review by Thursday afternoon, delivering findings that even I found shocking. I sit in David Chen's meticulously organized office at First New England Trust, watching as he walks me through spreadsheets detailing the full extent of Mark's financial deceptions. "Even with what you'd already uncovered," David explains, highlighting transactions on his monitor, "we weren't prepared for the breadth of his planning. He's been moving assets systematically for nearly 14 months. I lean forward, studying. The the timeline that now makes painful sense. 14 months ago, right after I'd mentioned wanting to restart my career, right after I'd suggested having children, I remember Mark's dismissive response. Why complicate our perfect life? It hadn't been about preserving our lifestyle. He'd already been seeing Jessica. Show me the worst of it, I request, bracing myself. David clicks to another screen, revealing transfers to a holding company registered in Wyoming. He created shell corporations here, then filtered money through them to purchase property and investments we believe were intended for his new life. The Back Bay apartment was just the beginning. Rachel, who insisted on attending this meeting, whistles softly. He was planning to leave you with nothing but this house, which, by the way, has a second mortgage you didn't know about. My stomach tightens. A second mortgage? How is that possible without my signature? David grimaces. He used a power of attorney you signed 3 years ago when you were having surgery. It was supposed to be limited in scope, but the language was broad enough that he could leverage it for financial transactions. So, our home isn't even fully ours. The betrayal feels physical, a hollow ache beneath my ribs. It gets more complicated, David continues, pulling up another document. The supposed college fund for your future children? It exists, but you're not on the account. The beneficiary is listed as future issue of Mark Wilson. Legally ambiguous language that could apply to any of his children. Like the baby Jessica is carrying, I conclude. Rachel makes a note in her legal pad. This strengthens our case. For financial deception. Judge Morrison specifically mentioned wanting evidence of premeditated financial concealment. Oh, we have that in spades, David confirms, clicking through more screens. Look at these life insurance policies. He's been paying premiums on a policy that lists Jessica as beneficiary, started 10 months ago. My wedding ring suddenly feels constrictive. I twist it absently, wondering when it transformed from symbol of commitment to shackle. Any evidence? He was planning to marry her? David hesitates. We found inquiries to a jeweler in New York. Custom engagement ring. Paid in full 3 weeks ago. Scheduled for pickup next month. The timing aligns perfectly with when Mark had planned to. Ask for divorce, after our anniversary, before the holidays. I imagine the scenario he'd choreographed. A dignified separation announcement to friends and family, followed by a respectable interval before introducing Jessica as his new partner. His pregnant girlfriend would become his fiancée, then wife. With most people never realizing the timeline didn't add up. He would have rewritten history, I murmur, more to myself than to David and Rachel. Made everyone believe our marriage had been over long before he met her. Classic gaslighting. Rachel agrees, but these financial records tell the real story. What about the joint accounts he didn't drain? I ask, refocusing on practical matters. David pulls up another spreadsheet. Based on withdrawal patterns, he was moving methodically to avoid triggering fraud alerts. Another 3 weeks, and your joint savings would have been reduced to about $30,000, enough that you wouldn't be immediately destitute, but insufficient for you to maintain this lifestyle independently. While he set up a parallel financial structure for his new family, Rachel concludes, classic divorce playbook, page 1, control the money, control the narrative. My phone buzzes with an incoming call, Jessica Palmer. Since our unexpected dinner conversation 3 nights ago, she's called twice. I declined both times, unsure what more needed to be said between us. You might want to take that, Rachel suggests. She's filing her own suits against Mark. Her attorney reached out to me this morning about coordinating our approaches. I step into the hallway accepting the call. Jessica, this is Emily. Thank you for answering. Her voice sounds strained, exhausted. I've been talking to lawyers all morning. They're saying I should file a separate suit for paternity and support, but I wanted to speak with you first. An unexpected courtesy, given the circumstances. I appreciate that. My attorney mentioned your counsel had reached out. Mark came to my apartment last night, she continues, completely drunk, alternating between begging me to stand by him and accusing me of conspiring with you. When I refused to let him stay, he became unpleasant. Alarm sharpens my focus. Unpleasant how? Nothing physical, she clarifies quickly, but threatening. Said if I pursued child support, he'd make sure I regretted it. That with his legal connections, he could drag things out until I was bankrupt. Mark's threat reveals more about his character than perhaps he intended. The man I married would never have intimidated a pregnant woman, no matter the circumstances. The person he's become, or perhaps always was beneath the carefully maintained facade, is someone I barely recognize. Jessica, are you recording these conversations? I ask, lawyer's daughter instincts kicking in. No, should I be? Absolutely. Massachusetts is a two-party consent state for recordings, but you can and should document everything in writing, immediately after any interaction. Timestamps, exact quotes, context. Like you did, she observes, insight sharpening her tone. At the restaurant, you had everything documented. Receipts, dates, messages. Yes. How long did you know? About me, I mean. I hesitate, calculating how much to reveal. I had suspicions for about 6 months. Confirmation for 3. And you just waited, planned, didn't confront him? Confronting him would have given him time to cover his tracks, to create a more favorable narrative for himself. I pause, realizing Jessica deserves complete honesty. And yes, I wanted him to face consequences. Public ones. Silence stretches between us, 2 women connected by the same man's betrayal. I should hate you, Jessica finally says. Before the restaurant, in my version of reality, you were the cold, career-obsessed wife who neglected him. The obstacle to our happiness. And in my version, you were the calculating homewrecker targeting a wealthy married man. She makes a sound, half laugh, half sob. We were both playing roles in his story without realizing it. Yes, I agree. Softly. We were. My lawyer says I should distance myself from your case. That allying with you might undermine my position with the court. I understand the legal strategy, even as I recognize its emotional cost for Jessica. Your lawyer is probably right. Your priority needs to be your child. Our hearing is next. Wednesday. Will you be there? I hadn't planned to be. The thought of watching Jessica formally establish her claim to Mark's financial support, and by extension, permanent connection to our social circle, feels unnecessarily painful. I understand, she says, though disappointment colors her tone. I just thought, never mind, it doesn't matter. Something in her voice, vulnerability beneath attempted strength, reminds me of myself in those first raw days of discovery. Before anger crystallized into purpose, before pain transformed into determination. Jessica, what do you need from me? I ask directly. Beyond legal coordination. Her breath catches. I don't know. Validation? Someone who understands what it's like to realize your entire relationship was built on lies? My friends either think I'm getting what I deserve for dating a married man, or they're still buying Mark's story that your marriage was essentially over. I recognize her isolation, the unique loneliness of having your personal tragedy become public spectacle, with audiences choosing sides and assigning blame based on incomplete information. Next Wednesday, I say decisively. I'll be there. After ending the call, I return to David's office where he and Rachel are deep in discussion about offshore accounts and tax implications. They pause, looking up expectantly. Jessica's hearing is Wednesday, I inform them. I'm going. Rachel's eyebrows lift. Are you sure that's wise? It could be interpreted as antagonistic. Or it could demonstrate to Judge Morrison that we recognize there's an innocent child involved. I counter. That despite personal feelings, I'm not seeking punitive measures that would harm Mark's ability to support his child. Strategic. Compassion, Rachel muses. It could work in our favor. The contrast between your behavior and Mark's will be stark. David clears his throat. Speaking of Mark's behavior, there's something else you should see. He clicks to another screen, revealing a series of transfers from Mark's personal investment account to a law firm I don't recognize. Bergman, Wyatt and Associates. They specialize in aggressive divorce litigation and asset concealment. Rachel sits forward, instantly alert. When did he retain them? Initial consultation was 7 months ago. Monthly retainer payments started 3 months ago. The timeline lands like a physical blow. While I was discovering his affair and beginning my own preparations, Mark was simultaneously consulting divorce attorneys specifically known for helping wealthy clients hide assets from spouses. He was playing both sides, I realize aloud. Setting up his new life with Jessica while preparing legal defenses in case I discovered the truth. Classic hedging strategy, David agrees. Though not particularly sophisticated, he left electronic trails everywhere. Because he never expected Emily to look, Rachel points out. His entire plan depended on her remaining exactly who he believed her to be. Trusting, financially naive, emotionally dependent. I stare at the monitor, at the digital breadcrumbs of my husband's betrayal. Each transaction represents a moment when Mark actively chose deception, when he consciously worked to undermine the future we'd supposedly built together. What happens to these accounts now? I ask, pushing past the emotional response to focus on practical outcomes. Most remain. Frozen pending court determinations, David explains, though Judge Morrison's temporary orders prevent any further dispersal of joint assets. And Bergman, Wyatt and Associates? Rachel smiles thinly. Apparently, they dropped him as a client yesterday after learning their retainer was potentially paid with misappropriated marital funds. Even shark attorneys have limits to the liability they'll accept. As we conclude the meeting, gathering documents and planning next steps, I find myself dwelling on Jessica's perspective. For months, I've seen her as merely an extension of Mark's betrayal, a younger, more pliable replacement chosen specifically because she represented everything I wasn't. But our conversation revealed something I hadn't fully appreciated. She's been manipulated as thoroughly as I was, played for a different role in the same deceptive production. Her pregnancy, which I initially viewed as the ultimate betrayal, now seems like another victim of Mark's calculated selfishness. Outside First New England Trust, Boston's financial district pulses with end-of-day energy. Workers stream from office buildings, heading to trains or after-work gatherings. Normal life continuing while mine remains suspended in this liminal space between married and divorced, between the life I thought I had and whatever comes next. My phone buzzes with a text from Olivia, Mark's sister. Dinner tonight? Just us. No family drama. Promise. I hesitate, then accept. Since the restaurant. Revelation, Mark's family has fractured along predictable lines. His parents and sister have rallied around me, while certain cousins and his paternal uncle defend him with comments about midlife crises and complex emotional situations. Olivia suggested Morton's, neutral territory, with excellent martinis. When I arrive, she's already claimed a quiet corner booth, 2 cocktails waiting. I ordered your usual, she says, sliding a dirty martini toward me as I sit. Extra olives, because this week definitely calls for extra olives. I manage a genuine smile, grateful for her steady presence. Unlike Margaret's fiery outrage or Robert's stoic disappointment, Olivia has maintained a practical perspective throughout the unfolding drama. How are Mom and Dad today? I ask, sipping my perfectly mixed drink. Mom's still in scorched earth mode. She's calling every Wilson family connection personally to correct misperceptions about the situation. Olivia rolls her eyes fondly. Dad's blood pressure is finally stabilizing. Doctor says he can attend the hearing next week if he stays calm. He doesn't need to come, I protest. The media attention is already... He insists, Olivia interrupts gently. Says it's important to show unified family support. For you, not Mark. The gesture touches me deeply. Despite having no biological connection to the Wilsons, they've chosen me in this fractured family equation. Have you spoken with Mark? I ask carefully. Olivia nods, expression complicated. Briefly, he came by my office yesterday, looking for sympathy, I suspect. Found none. What did he say? That you've turned the family against him, that no one understands the complicated circumstances that led to his relationship with Jessica. She makes air quotes around Mark's euphemism. I reminded him that getting someone pregnant while married creates consequences regardless of circumstance. The waiter arrives to take our dinner orders, providing momentary respite from the weight of conversation. After he departs, Olivia leans forward, her expression shifting from supportive to concerned. Emily, there's something else you should know. Mark's telling people you had fertility issues, that you refused to consider children, which drove him to seek a relationship with someone who wanted a family. My martini glass freezes halfway to my lips. What? It's disgusting, I know. Mom shut him down immediately when he tried it with her, but he's been floating this narrative with business associates, college friends, people who might not know the truth. The calculated cruelty of this particular lie steals my breath. Mark knows, has always known, that building a family was my deepest desire, one I'd temporarily set aside to support his career ambitions. The suggestion that I'd refused motherhood isn't just factually wrong. It inverts one of the most painful compromises I made for our marriage. The irony, I say when I can finally speak, is that I was researching fertility specialists last year, thought we might start trying for a baby around our anniversary. Olivia reaches across the table, squeezing my hand. I suspected as much. Mark's always been strategic with his lies, targeting the areas most difficult to definitively disprove. Like claiming a negative, that I refused something, rather than asserting I did something provable. Exactly. It's what made him such an effective litigator. We pause as our steaks arrive, the conversation shifting to lighter topics while we eat. Olivia updates me on her architectural firm's latest projects, and I share tentative plans for redecorating the townhouse, removing Mark's heavy masculine aesthetics in favor of the lighter, more contemporary style I've always preferred. Over dessert, chocolate soufflé, a pointed reclaiming of what was interrupted at the harbor view, Olivia broaches another sensitive subject. Mom mentioned you're attending Jessica's hearing next week. I nod, breaking through the soufflé's crust with my spoon. It seemed important, both strategically and, morally? Because of the baby, Olivia surmises. Partly because I understand her position better now. The disorientation of discovering your entire relationship was built on careful lies. Olivia studies me thoughtfully. You know, when this first happened, I expected you to fall apart. We all did. Mark certainly did. I nearly did, I admit. Those first few weeks after finding out, I could barely function, kept reliving every moment, reinterpreting every conversation through this new lens of betrayal. What changed? I consider this question carefully, wanting to articulate the transformation accurately. I realized that falling apart was exactly what Mark expected, what he'd counted on, actually. That my emotional devastation was a calculated factor in his exit strategy. So you channeled the pain differently, into planning, into protecting myself in all the ways he assumed I couldn't or wouldn't. I take another bite of soufflé, savoring its bittersweet richness. Though I won't pretend it was purely strategic. Having Jessica appear at our anniversary dinner was admittedly theatrical. Olivia's laugh is sudden and genuine. God, his face when she walked in. I've watched that video at least 20 times. Video? I freeze, spoon halfway to my mouth. Oh, you haven't seen it? Someone at the restaurant recorded the whole thing. It's not exactly viral, but it's definitely making rounds in Boston social circles. She pulls out her phone, searching briefly before sliding it toward me. See for yourself. The video quality is surprisingly good, capturing the exact moment Jessica approached our table, Mark's expression transforming from confused to horrified as recognition dawned. The camera angle even caught my calm response, the documents I produced, Margaret's perfectly timed entrance. Watching the scene from this external perspective feels surreal, like viewing a particularly dramatic movie rather than a pivotal moment. From my own life, the Emily on screen appears composed, almost glacial in her controlled responses. I look. Magnificent, Olivia supplies. Like a chess master revealing checkmate. I hand back her phone, unsettled by this public documentation of private pain. I didn't know anyone was recording. Does it change anything for you? Knowing it's out there? I consider this seriously. It makes everything more real somehow. Less like something that happened to me and more like a story people are consuming. Welcome to divorce in the digital age, Olivia says dryly. Though, if it helps, the comments are overwhelmingly on your side. Mark comes off looking exactly like what he is, a cheater caught in spectacular fashion. As we finish dinner and prepare to leave, Olivia offers one final piece of information. Jessica reached out to me yesterday, asked if I'd be willing to meet for coffee. This surprises me. What did you say? I agreed. Whatever happens with Mark, that baby is my niece or nephew. Family is family, even when it's complicated. Her simple declaration of principle reminds me why I've always admired Olivia's straightforward approach to life. While Margaret rages and Robert retreats into dignified disappointment, Olivia faces reality without flinching, acknowledging complexities without excusing wrongdoing. You're a better person than I am, I tell her sincerely. She shakes her head. Different, not better. You've handled this with more grace than anyone had any right to expect, Emily, including me. We part with a lingering hug on the sidewalk outside Morton's, promising to check in before Wednesday's hearing. As I walk toward the parking garage, Boston's evening skyline glitters with possibility rather than menace for the first time since this ordeal began. Tomorrow brings more meetings, with bankers, with lawyers, with realtors assessing the townhouse's value for potential sale. But tonight, surrounded by the ambient noise of a city continuing its rhythms regardless of personal dramas, I feel the first tentative stirrings of whatever comes after survival. Not healing, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of its possibility. Jessica's hearing at Suffolk County Family Court falls on a Wednesday morning crisp with early autumn promise. I arrive 20 minutes early, choosing a seat near the back of the courtroom where I can observe without immediately drawing attention. The room gradually fills with the usual participants in these proceedings: lawyers with overstuffed briefcases, court reporters preparing their equipment, clerks shuffling paperwork with practiced efficiency. At 9:47, Jessica enters accompanied by an older woman who shares her delicate features. Her mother, I assume. Jessica looks different today. Her typical Instagram-ready style replaced by a modest navy dress that accommodates her pregnancy while projecting appropriate courtroom decorum. She hasn't noticed me yet, focused entirely on whispered conversations with her attorney, a sharp-featured woman whose reputation in family court precedes her. Mark arrives at 9:52, cutting it uncomfortably close to our 10 a.m. hearing time. He's accompanied by Richard Bergman himself. Apparently, the prestigious firm reconsidered their decision to drop him as a client. The optics of representing a wealthy client accused of abandoning his pregnant girlfriend must have ultimately proven too financially tempting to resist. I watch Mark scan the courtroom, his gaze sliding past me initially before snapping back with visible shock. His expression cycles rapidly through surprise, confusion, and wariness. He leans to whisper something to Bergman, who turns to assess me with calculating eyes. Jessica finally spots me, her eyes widening momentarily before she offers a small, uncertain nod of acknowledgement. Her mother follows her gaze, studying me with undisguised curiosity. The wife, the obstacle, the unexpected ally. At precisely 10 Agcounds, a side door opens and Judge Carolyn Peterson enters. A diminutive woman whose reputation for no-nonsense efficiency has earned her the nickname Punctual Peterson among family court regulars. The bailiff calls the court to order, and we all rise as custom dictates. Wilson vs. Wilson, regarding paternity and support, the clerk announces, momentarily creating confusion until Judge Peterson clarifies. I believe this is Palmer versus Wilson, she corrects, reviewing the file before her. Though I understand there's a related Wilson versus Wilson matter before Judge Morrison next week. That's correct, Your Honor, Jessica's attorney confirms. Separate proceedings, related circumstances. Judge Peterson surveys the courtroom, her gaze lingering briefly on me before returning to the parties directly before her. Very well. Let's begin with establishing paternity. Mr. Wilson, you've already submitted to testing. Mark clears his throat. Yes, Your Honor. And those results are conclusive, the judge continues, reviewing documents. 97% probability of paternity for the child Ms. Palmer is carrying. Expected delivery approximately 6 weeks from today. The clinical recitation of these facts strikes me differently than I anticipated. Rather than fresh pain, I feel oddly detached, as though watching a play about strangers whose lives intersect in complicated ways. We'll proceed then to establishing appropriate support, Judge Peterson continues. I've reviewed the financial disclosures provided by both parties. Bergman rises smoothly. Your Honor, if I may, my client's financial situation is currently in flux due to pending divorce proceedings. We would request deferring permanent support determinations until those matters are resolved. Jessica's attorney counters immediately. Your Honor, Ms. Palmer is due to deliver in 6 weeks. She requires immediate financial support for medical expenses and necessary preparations. Mr. Wilson's attempt to delay is merely tactical. Judge Peterson's expression remains impassive, but her tone sharpens. Mr. Bergman, while I appreciate the complexities of your client's situation, the child's needs cannot be postponed until convenient for Mr. Wilson. The timing of these overlapping legal matters is entirely of your client's making. Bergman attempts another approach. We're merely suggesting temporary measures until the complete financial picture. The complete financial picture, Judge Peterson interrupts, appears to be that your client maintained 2 separate households and relationships while concealing significant assets from both women involved. Am I misunderstanding something fundamental about this case, counselor? Mark shifts uncomfortably in his seat, his usual courtroom confidence notably absent. This environment, a family court rather than the corporate litigation settings, where he typically excels, has him visibly unsettled. No, Your Honor, Bergman concedes. However, nothing, Judge Peterson states firmly. I've reviewed the financial disclosures carefully, including those submitted to Judge Morrison in the divorce proceedings. Mr. Wilson's assets, while potentially subject to division in divorce, remain substantial. I see no justification for delaying support for this child. For the next 40 minutes, I watch as the attorneys argue specifics, housing allowances, medical coverage, childcare provisions. Mark's legal strategy becomes increasingly clear. He's attempting to minimize financial obligations to Jessica and the baby while preserving as much as possible for himself post-divorce. The pettiness of his approach surprises me. The Mark I thought I knew would have embraced responsibility for his child regardless of circumstances. This calculating man before me, haggling over prenatal vitamin costs and bassinet allowances. Seems like a stranger wearing my husband's expensive suit. Mr. Wilson, Judge Peterson finally interjects during a particularly tedious debate about pediatric coverage. May I ask a direct question? Mark straightens. Of course, Your Honor. Do you intend to be involved in this child's life beyond financial support? The court notes no requests regarding visitation or custody arrangements in your filings. The question hangs in the air, heavy with implication. My attention sharpens, suddenly intensely curious about Mark's answer. Throughout our marriage, he'd spoken often about wanting children eventually, describing the coaching, the guidance, the father-son camping trips he envisioned. Mark hesitates, glancing toward Bergman, who offers no visible guidance. My circumstances are complicated at present, Your Honor. Once my divorce is finalized and living arrangements stabilized, I intend to establish appropriate visitation. Judge Peterson studies him, her expression unreadable. I see. And these appropriate arrangements would begin. When, exactly? After birth? 3 months later? When financially convenient? Mark's discomfort intensifies under her direct questioning. I haven't established a specific timeline. Your child will be born in approximately 6 weeks, Mr. Wilson. I suggest you develop a specific timeline with some urgency. Judge Peterson turns to Jessica. Ms. Palmer, what are your wishes regarding Mr. Wilson's involvement with the child? Jessica rests her hands protectively over her rounded abdomen. I want my son to know his father, Your Honor. But I also want him to be wanted, not just obligated to. The simple dignity of her response affects me unexpectedly. Whatever her flaws or poor judgments in becoming involved with a married man, Jessica's focus on her child's emotional well-being speaks to her character. Judge Peterson nods thoughtfully. A reasonable position? She reviews her notes briefly before continuing. Here's my ruling. Mr. Wilson will provide immediate support as outlined in Schedule A of Ms. Palmer's petition, including medical expenses, housing allowance, and necessary preparations for the child's arrival. Following birth, we will reassess. Based on Mr. Wilson's divorce settlement and demonstrated commitment to parental involvement. Bergman begins to object, but Judge Peterson silences him with a raised hand. Additionally, Mr. Wilson will attend parenting classes beginning no later than next week. The court can provide recommendations if needed. Parenting classes? Mark echoes, sounding genuinely confused. Yes, Mr. Wilson. They're educational sessions designed to prepare adults for the responsibilities of raising children. Since you've expressed uncertainty about your involvement timeline, I believe some structured preparation may be beneficial. Judge Peterson's tone remains professional, though I detect subtle rebuke beneath her words. As the hearing concludes, I remain seated while the principals gather their belongings. Jessica confers briefly with her attorney before making her way toward me, her approach hesitant but determined. Thank you for coming, she says simply, one hand supporting her lower back in a gesture familiar to any woman who's experienced late-stage pregnancy discomfort. It seemed important, I reply, rising to meet her at eye level. Jessica glances toward Mark, who's watching our interaction with poorly disguised alarm. He didn't expect us to communicate directly. It undermines his narrative about both of us. I've noticed he prefers to keep his world separate, controlled environments where he establishes the rules of engagement. She nods, understanding. Immediately. The stories he told about you. I'm embarrassed now that I believed them. The stories were designed to be believable, I offer, surprising myself with this small absolution. He's always been skilled at crafting narratives that serve his purposes. Mark approaches cautiously, Bergman trailing behind with obvious reluctance. The four of us form an awkward tableau in the now emptying courtroom. Husband, wife, girlfriend, lawyer, connected by circumstance rather than choice. What are you doing here, Emily? Mark asks directly, his tone hovering between defensive and accusatory. Observing, I reply simply. Learning. This doesn't concern you, he insists, though his uncertain glance toward Bergman betrays his awareness that my presence likely strengthens Jessica's position. A child that bears your name concerns me, I counter quietly. Not legally, perhaps, but morally. Mark's expression hardens. Spare me the moral high ground performance. We both know this is about making me look bad for the divorce proceedings. Jessica shifts uncomfortably, preparing to step away from our marital discord, but I gently touch her arm to stay her departure. Not everything is about you, Mark, I tell him, keeping my voice level. Or about our divorce. Sometimes people make choices based on principles rather than advantages. Bergman clears his throat diplomatically. Mr. Wilson, we should discuss next steps privately. Ms. Palmer's counsel has requested an initial support payment by Friday. Mark hesitates, clearly wanting to continue our confrontation, but recognizing the strategic disadvantage of doing so in this setting. With a final frustrated glance between Jessica and me, he follows Bergman from the courtroom. He really doesn't understand, does he? Jessica observes once they've departed, that some things aren't tactical maneuvers. Mark sees relationships as transactions, I reply, gathering my purse. He always has, though I misinterpreted it as pragmatism rather than calculation. Jessica's mother approaches, her expression guarded but not hostile. Jessica, we should get going. Your appointment is at noon. Jessica performs brief introductions. Mom, this is Emily Wilson. Emily, my mother, Catherine Palmer. Catherine studies me with careful assessment. This is unusual. The whole situation is unusual, I acknowledge. But I wanted Jessica to know she's not alone in dealing with Mark's manipulations. Something in Catherine's posture softens slightly. When Jessica told me about your restaurant confrontation, I assumed you'd be a vengeful harridan, I suggest with a small smile. Determined to punish the other woman? Something like that, Catherine admits. In your position, I might have been. I considered it, I confess. For about 3 days, I fantasized about various scenarios involving public humiliation, hair pulling, drink throwing, the full dramatic spectrum. Jessica winces. I would have deserved it. No, I correct her gently. Mark's behavior is his responsibility. I won't absolve you completely. You knew he was married, but I recognize how convincing his deceptions can be. Catherine checks her watch. Jessica, we need to leave for your appointment. Of course. Jessica hesitates, then asks, will you be at the divorce hearing next week? Yes. Judge Morrison expects substantial media presence, unfortunately. Because of the video, Jessica surmises. I nod, still uncomfortable with how public our private drama has become. Apparently, our situation has all the elements Boston society finds irresistible: money, infidelity, public confrontation. Mark's been calling me, Jessica confides suddenly. Late at night, after his lawyer meetings, alternating between blaming me for overreacting by filing for support and suggesting we could still have a future once the divorce settles. This information doesn't surprise me, though it disappoints. And what do you tell him? That I'll communicate through attorneys until he demonstrates consistent, responsible behavior. Jessica straightens her shoulders, a new resolve evident in her posture. The fantasy relationship he sold me is gone. Now I'm focused entirely on my son's well-being. The simple clarity of her priority resonates with me. While I've been navigating financial complexities and social fallout, Jessica has reoriented her entire life around the child she'll soon meet. If you need anything, I offer, surprising myself with the sincerity behind my words, don't hesitate to call. Whatever happens between Mark and me, or Mark and you, shouldn't affect how we treat each other. Catherine's eyebrows lift slightly at this unexpected alliance, but Jessica simply nods, understanding the unusual bond forged through shared deception. After they leave, I remain in the courtroom briefly, absorbing the morning's developments. Mark's reluctance to embrace fatherhood contradicts everything he'd expressed during our marriage. I wonder now if his frequent mentions of someday having children were merely performances designed to maintain our relationship while postponing actual commitment. Outside the courthouse, Boston's government center bustles with midday activity. Lawyers rush between buildings, tourists photograph historic architecture, food trucks serve lunch to courthouse employees. Normal life continuing while mine remains in this strange transitional state. Not yet divorced, no longer truly married, suspended between past certainty and future unknown. My phone buzzes with a text from Rachel. How was the hearing? Anything relevant to our case? I consider how to summarize what I've witnessed. Beyond specific financial rulings, the most significant revelation was Mark himself. His calculating approach to parental responsibility, his continued attempts to manipulate Jessica, his obvious discomfort at seeing Jessica and me communicating directly. Illuminating. I reply simply, "We'll brief you at tomorrow's meeting." Another message arrives, this one from Olivia. "Lunch? I'm at Stephanie's Deli around the corner. Jessica told me you'd be at court today." The invitation intrigues me. Olivia meeting Jessica for coffee is one thing. Her continued communication suggests developing relationship rather than one-time courtesy. Stephanie's is a narrow, perpetually crowded luncheonette whose recession-proof business model relies on proximity to the courthouse and superior pastrami sandwiches. I spot Olivia at a corner table, already halfway through what appears to be a Reuben. "Court proceedings always make me hungry," she explains as I slide into the opposite chair. "Something about watching people argue makes me crave comfort food." "How often are you in court?" I ask, genuinely curious. Olivia's architectural practice typically involves construction contracts rather than litigation. "More often lately. I've been accompanying Jessica to preliminary hearings." She says this casually, though clearly aware it might surprise me. "That's unexpected." Olivia shrugs, wiping Thousand Island dressing from her fingers. "It started as courtesy, family checking on family, even family in complicated formation. Then I genuinely started to like her." "Jessica mentioned you've been talking." "We have," Olivia confirms. She's not what Mark described to any of us. Not naive, not calculating, not unsophisticated. Just someone who made an unfortunate choice in men, something many women can relate to. The server approaches and I order a simple turkey sandwich and iced tea, my appetite diminished by the morning's proceedings. "How was the hearing?" Olivia asks once we're alone again. "Educational. Judge Peterson ordered immediate support, parenting classes, and made it clear she expects Mark to develop a relationship with his child, regardless of his complicated circumstances." Olivia snorts softly. "Good. Mark's been floating trial. Balloons about minimal involvement, focusing on financial support rather than actual parenting. This confirms my courtroom observations. That contradicts everything he ever said about wanting children. I think," Olivia suggests carefully, "that Mark likes the idea of fatherhood more than the reality. The legacy, the continuation of the Wilson name, the theoretical son he could mold in his image. All appealing concepts that don't require midnight feedings or diaper changes." Her assessment aligns with patterns I've recently recognized in other aspects of our marriage. Mark often embraced concepts: devoted husband, successful attorney, philanthropist, future father, without fully engaging with the mundane realities each role entailed. "You're disappointed in him," I observe, noting the sadness beneath Olivia's matter-of-fact analysis. "Profoundly," she confirms. "Though perhaps I shouldn't be. He's always chosen appearance over substance when the two conflict. I just never saw it applied to something as fundamental as his own child. My sandwich arrives, though I merely pick at it, more interested in conversation than food. Jessica seems committed to ensuring her son has a relationship with Mark. Despite everything, she's remarkably pragmatic, Olivia agrees. No vindictiveness, just clear-eyed determination to create stability for her baby. My parents are quietly impressed by her maturity, though Mom would rather drink bleach than admit it openly. The mental image of Margaret Wilson reluctantly approving of her husband's pregnant mistress makes me smile despite the situation's overall gravity. What happens after? I ask, the question that's been lingering beneath all others. After the divorce is finalized, after Jessica's baby is born, after the immediate drama settles, what does that new reality look like for all of us? Olivia considers this thoughtfully. Honestly, I don't know. Family gatherings will certainly be awkward for the foreseeable future. But the baby is innocent in all this, and he'll be my nephew regardless of circumstances. You've already decided to maintain relationship with Jessica and the child. I have, she confirms without hesitation. Not because I approve of how this situation developed, but because family obligations don't disappear when things get complicated. The question is, what will you do? It's the question I've been avoiding, focusing instead on immediate financial and legal concerns rather than long-term emotional landscape. What role, if any, do I want in the life of Mark's child with another woman? I don't know yet, I admit. Everything still feels too raw to make decisions about ongoing connections. Fair enough, Olivia acknowledges. Though, for what it's worth, Jessica speaks of you with genuine respect. She told me your conversation at the restaurant changed how she sees everything, not just Mark, but her own choices and future. The revelation that I've influenced Jessica's perspective causes complicated emotions. There's validation in being seen accurately rather than through Mark's distorted lens, but also strange responsibility in knowing my words carry weight with someone navigating her own crisis. This isn't how I imagined spending September, I observe wryly. Courtroom appearances, forensic accountants, unexpected alliances. Life rarely follows anticipated scripts, Olivia replies, signaling for the check. The question is how we improvise when the original storyline falls apart. As we part outside the deli, Olivia heading to her downtown office while I return to the Beacon Hill townhouse that feels increasingly like temporary accommodation rather than home, I find myself reflecting on her question. The script I'd been following, supportive wife, future mother, eventual career renaissance, has indeed collapsed. The improvisation thus far has focused primarily on survival and justice, documenting Mark's deceptions, securing financial stability, ensuring appropriate consequences for betrayal. But survival, while necessary, isn't sufficient for building whatever comes next. At some point, improvisation must give way to intentional composition, new narratives based not on reaction to Mark's choices, but on affirmative vision for my own future. The afternoon stretches before me, hours until my scheduled call with Rachel to prepare for next week's hearing. For the first time in months, I redirect my focus from the marriage ending to the life beginning. Not Jessica's new child, but my own emerging identity separate from the roles I've occupied these past 5 years. I change direction, heading toward the harbor rather than home. The water has always helped clarify my thoughts, the rhythm of waves against docks providing perspective that enclosed spaces cannot. Whatever comes after survival is still taking shape, its outlines indistinct but gradually solidifying with each decision that prioritizes future possibility over past grievance. The script has indeed fallen apart, but perhaps that creates space for a better story, one where I'm author rather than supporting character, defining the narrative instead of merely responding to plot twists beyond my control. Judge Morrison's courtroom falls silent as Mark enters with his newly assembled legal team. Not Bergman's aggressive divorce specialists, but Hawthorne, Prescott, and Lyle, known for representing high-profile clients concerned with reputation, management. The strategy shift isn't subtle, especially when I notice Caroline Prescott herself leading his counsel. Her specialty isn't maximizing financial outcomes, but minimizing public relations damage. Mark has finally recognized that his greatest vulnerability isn't monetary but reputational. "All rise," the bailiff announces as Judge Elaine Morrison enters, her silver hair pulled into an immaculate chignon, her expression revealing nothing as she surveys the crowded courtroom. Media interest has intensified since Jessica's hearing, with several local reporters occupying back row seats and a court artist rapidly sketching preliminary compositions. For the next 2 hours, Rachel systematically presents our case: documentation of hidden accounts, evidence of Mark's long-term planning, timeline of asset transfers that directly contradicts his sworn financial disclosures. I watch Mark throughout, noting how he maintains careful composure while occasionally scribbling notes to Prescott. He's fully in corporate attorney mode now, focused on damage control rather than emotional reaction. The courtroom dynamics shift noticeably when Rachel introduces evidence from Jessica's proceedings, specifically Mark's reluctance to commit to involvement with his soon-to-be-born child. "Your Honor," Rachel explains, "this demonstrates pattern and character relevant to enforcing the morality clause in the prenuptial agreement. Mr. Wilson's behavior constitutes not just infidelity, but abandonment of family responsibilities." When the court calls a brief recess, I observe Mark in intense conversation with Prescott, their expressions suggesting significant disagreement. Rachel notices too, leaning close to whisper, "His team just realized he's been holding back information." Prescott hates surprises in her cases. It's terrible for controlled narrative. The courtroom dynamics grow increasingly tense after recess. Judge Morrison questions Mark directly about discrepancies in financial disclosures, his answers becoming noticeably less confident. "Mr. Wilson," Judge Morrison says, reviewing documents with deliberate attention, "you testified in initial proceedings that all marital assets had been properly disclosed. Yet forensic accounting reveals at least 3 offshore accounts established during your marriage that weren't included in disclosures. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Mark shifts uncomfortably. Those accounts were established for speculative investments outside normal marital finances. Were they disclosed to Mrs. Wilson? Not specifically, no. They were high-risk ventures I didn't want. "Mr. Wilson," Judge Morrison interrupts, "are you familiar with Massachusetts law regarding marital assets?" When proceedings adjourn for the day, Rachel appears cautiously optimistic. Morrison's giving nothing away explicitly, but her questioning suggests she's leaning toward enforcing the prenup morality clause. That puts you in significantly stronger position. Outside the courthouse, unexpected autumn warmth bathes Government Center Plaza in golden afternoon light. I've just declined Rachel's invitation for strategic dinner planning when a voice calls. My name? Jessica, waiting near the building's side entrance. "I hope you don't mind," she says, approaching cautiously. I wanted to hear how things went, but didn't want to actually attend. Seemed unnecessarily provocative. Her thoughtfulness surprises me. "It went well, I think. Judge Morrison seems skeptical of Mark's financial disclosures. Have you considered what you want your after to look like?" she asks. The question creates momentary pause. Focus has remained on surviving process rather than envisioning result. Professional reestablishment for starters. I've missed financial analysis more than I realized. And beyond work? I hesitate, certain aspects of my envisioned future still taking shape. I want reconstruction without bitterness, to build something new without foundation stones of resentment or victimhood. Jessica nods, understanding immediately. Not defining yourself as the wronged wife forever. Exactly. That identity served its purpose during crisis, but it's insufficient for building whatever comes next. As Jessica walks carefully toward the parking area, I notice Mark exiting the courthouse with Prescott. He spots Jessica immediately, then me, his expression cycling through surprise, suspicion, and calculation as he processes our apparent conversation. Before he can approach, Prescott skillfully redirects him toward their waiting car, her crisis. Management instincts clearly recognizing potential complications of unstructured interaction. My phone buzzes with a text from Rachel. Prescott requested private meeting tomorrow morning. Settlement discussions likely. Don't respond to any direct outreach from Mark tonight. The message confirms my observations about courtroom developments. Mark's team, recognizing their position, has weakened substantially, seeking controlled resolution rather than continued public examination of his conduct. On impulse, I decide to walk rather than taking a cab home, needing physical movement to process the day's developments. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows across Boston Common as I follow familiar pathways, each step reinforcing emerging clarity about what I want from divorce proceedings. Not maximum financial gain or punitive outcomes, but appropriate accountability that enables forward movement. By the time I reach Beacon Hill, twilight has settled over Boston's historic neighborhoods, windows glowing warmly in centuries-old townhomes. The house Mark and I purchased with dreams of filling its many rooms now feels simultaneously too empty and too full, vacant of the future we'd planned, yet crowded with memories requiring sorting and resolution. Left momentarily alone with my soon-to-be ex-husband, I feel a curious emptiness where rage or satisfaction should be. You could have just asked for a divorce, I tell him quietly. I would have given you one. Would you have let me keep my dignity? He asks bitterly. I consider this question seriously. Probably not, I admit. But then you weren't planning to leave me mine. As he walks toward the door, shoulders bent under the weight of consequences, Mark pauses. Did you ever really love me? Or was I just some long-term investment strategy? The cruelty of his question catches me off guard. For all his faults, I never questioned whether Mark had loved me once. That he could doubt the authenticity of my feelings reveals how completely he's rewritten our history to justify his betrayal. I loved you enough to build a life around you, I answer truthfully. Enough to reshape myself to fit your expectations. Enough to ignore the signs that you'd stopped loving me. I meet his gaze directly. The question isn't whether I loved you, Mark. It's whether you ever really saw me at all. He has no answer for that. With a final nod that acknowledges the divide now unbridgeable between us, he walks out of Rachel's office and out of my life, not on his terms as he'd planned, but on mine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.